Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Coffee Shop Philosophy. As always, I'm your host, Killian Hobbs, Journalism Director at think-liberty.com, and a member of the Think Liberty Podcast Network. As always, you can visit us on our website, you can follow us on all forms of social media feeds, you can listen to our other podcasts here on the Think Liberty Network podcast channel, and you can follow us on YouTube, and I think we just recently added on to Mastodon as a new social media platform that we're available on for those of you that are moved over there or have been a part of that platform. On today's episode, I wanted to talk about something I don't usually talk about or had never really planned on talking about before, which is a meme. Now, I know this is more usually a philosophical or goes into psychology or different things like that as kind of the focus of the show here, but there's one that's recently come out that's kind of caught my attention that I think is worth looking into a little bit more in depth. So, for those of you unfamiliar with the internet at large, the one I wanted to talk about was the NPC meme that's been going around. Now, for those of you that are unaware, NPC comes out of video game terminology. It's a short form for non-player character. So when you're in a video game, and whether it's an action game or an RPG or whatever type of game that it is, any character that's in the game that you talk to that you don't control is an NPC. It's someone that's pre-generated and run by the AI. So it doesn't have the same controls to it that a player does. It's more or less interactive background, just given a face and a persona. This goes back even as far as tabletop gaming, when you would play, say, Dungeons and Dragons or something like that, and any character that the Dungeon Master or the DM of the game would run, those would be NPCs. So those would be characters that, again, you have no control of and are not integral to the story or a driving force behind the story in these things. They're simply pre-programmed side pieces that blend into the scenery. Now, the particular meme uses a generic MS Paint layout in order to dehumanize many people either on the political left or the people that are worshiping Trump or whichever group the memer decides to attack at that point. What's interesting with this meme is the amount of outrage that there's been about it, as well as the commentary that it makes about both discourse in society, the way we view people that look at things differently than we do, and also the way that a lot of us reach some of the ideas and talking points that we have. So I'll dive into a couple of descriptives for the meme first. So, for example, it'll show a picture of a celebrity with this face put over top of their actual face, saying something along the lines of, "Hello, I'm generic celebrity 6254. I believe in everything that's safe and politically correct and politically acceptable. So that means that you should too. Please buy the most recently manufactured thing I've created." Something that breaks down the idea that what they're saying isn't an original thought. It's not something that they actually put mental effort into. It's not something that they reached through actual research or through properly reasoning, but rather something that they were just programmed to say, sort of like an NPC would be. Now, what's fascinating with this is, like I mentioned before, the outrage, the absolute outrage over this. Between any of the things that have been used as, I guess you could say, slurs or just general insults in the internet world in, I'd say, at least the last 2-3 years, this is the first time that I've seen one that's actually drawn this much ire out of people. So, I mean, you call them snowflakes, or you call them Trump tards, or you call them social justice warriors, or you call people incels, or any of the, hell, you call them cucks. Any of the general insults that get thrown around the web are just considered insults. For the most part, they're a way to collectivize a group and mass shame them for all sharing a particular behavior that whoever's on the opposite side of this finds appalling or finds worth being mocked. What's interesting with this particular one, though, is that so many people have gotten upset over it rather than just insulting people back. So I want to dive in a little bit into why I think that is. First off, as I mentioned, the idea is that you're a non-player character. You're not a driving force. You're not a main component of what's happening in the world. You're simply there to regurgitate a few lines, and then people who are actually player characters move on past you. That's the why it's considered a more dehumanizing aspect, because it assumes that the people that they're talking to don't have a form of inner monologue. They're not acting as rational agents. They're simply regurgitating whatever it is they've been programmed to regurgitate. What's fascinating with this is there's two things that are fascinating with this. The first is how accurate that is for some people, and the way that they approach discourse and the way that they approach their ideas. So, for example, when you talk to someone that has a particular political stance and you know they have a certain political stance, then you already know the kinds of things they're going to say. You may not know the exact argument that they're going to use. At least you shouldn't know the exact argument they're going to use. But 9 times out of 10, you can probably predict it. Worse still is you can predict what their feelings are going to be on completely unrelated topics. So if you know their stance on, say, gun control, then you have a pretty good idea, I'd say probably within 80% accuracy at minimum, what their stance is on something more convoluted like welfare programs are going to be, or abortion, or whether or not to build the wall. You'll know what their stances are on these things, or at least can assume them, because they're thinking in a package. The way that they've reached their ideas, or the way that they've put things together, fits inside of a very specific kind of package. So you barely need to ask what their stances are on other things. You just need to pick one topic, and we assume we can know what the person's thinking about all of these other range of political or ideological topics. And the reason is because a lot of people do just regurgitate what they're told. If you know you have a certain stance on, say, let's say gun control. I already mentioned gun control. Let's go with gun control again. If you know you have a certain stance on gun control, and you come across a multitude of people who are on the opposite side of your stance. So let's say you're pro-gun control and you come across a whole bunch of people that are anti-gun control. I know for most of the listeners it's probably vice versa, but we'll go with this example. Let's say you're pro-gun control and you come across a bunch of people that are anti-gun control. Chances are you will find that those people are also against welfare programs. You'll find that a lot of those people might be a little bit more conservative in general with a bunch of other topics. You might find that a lot of those people are, very pro-traditionalism. And you shouldn't be able to know that that's what they're going to stand for based on their stance on one topic. We see this a lot with the political left as well, especially the progressives. So not just your Antifa or your ANCOMs or your generic run-of-the-mill, middle-of-the-pack Democrats or anything like that, but I'm talking your actual progressives, the one that up until now had been called snowflakes and SJWs. The people that if something happens, they have to find a way to put it through an identity politics lens. You can already know what their response is going to be to something happening before they even say it. We've taken it to the point where just by knowing that something's happening somewhere, we have validated Poe's law because some of these people exist. You can make up, on the spot, you could make up a stance that you think a progressive is going to have about a relatively benign topic. And normally, if you were trying to argue against that type of stance, you would be committing a straw man fallacy. You would be arguing against an argument that no one's made. The problem is, people with these political stances have become so predictable in how they're going to approach things, what their arguments are going to be, the things that they're going to say, that you don't even need a real person there to argue with, because you already know what the programming is going to lead to them saying. Now, as I mentioned, the second thing that I find fascinating with this meme, again, is the outrage. I hate to say this, I love the outrage that's coming out of this, because it's exposing cognitive dissonance, and it's exposing groupthink. The reason that people are as mad as they are about this is because of how heavily they identify with it. They know that they are exactly the type of person that's being called out in this. So because of that, they have gotten up in arms about this particular phrase, this one meme, out of any of the things that have been used to attack people on the left or attack people on the right. This is the one that as soon as it's applied to them, they've immediately jumped at as calling it dehumanizing and saying it's terrible. Twitter has gone as far as to start removing a whole bunch of accounts that have had just NPC in the name, which I think that'll make discussing video games on the platform pretty difficult for most people, but I guess that's an argument for another day. This also includes some accounts that were actual legitimate accounts. It's just the initials included NPC. That's how far they've gotten in trying to take down the usage of this one particular meme, of all things. I think that this wouldn't have as much of an impact on people in general or on discourse if people didn't identify with it as much as they do. If people didn't see in this particular meme aspects of themselves that they don't want to admit because they know they're guilty of. Nobody wants to be guilty of being just a mouthpiece, of just regurgitating what they've been told time and time again without actually having ever considered it themselves, without ever thought and reached those conclusions themselves, without being an active player character. They've just taken a side approach to regurgitating these stances and these statements. Now, I think it's really interesting from the groupthink perspective, because one of the things that I hate in discourse is tribalistic discourse. You'll find this anytime that you declare that you're belonging to a certain ideology, just any ideology. If you put a name to it, then people will automatically pre-assume that you are going to argue like everyone else that they've ever seen that's had that ideology. They don't believe that you could be a follower of a certain ideology, but also hold other thoughts on different topics that may or may not be unrelated. Now, I'll use a personal example. One of the previous podcasts when I was talking about some of this was I mentioned my stance on unions. And my stance on unions is my same stance on corporations, which is they can exist, they should exist. There's a lot of good that can be done from them existing. However, they should not have any form of government backing. I think that's a pretty consistent stance personally, but as soon as I tell someone that I'm against government involvement in unions, then all of a sudden I must be against unions, and in which case I have to stand for this, I have to stand for this, I have to be pro-child labor all of a sudden just because I disagree with government-enforced unions, because people make those hasty generalizations. They believe that because they've learned one thing about what a person's saying or about the stances that they have, that they're right on everything else that the person believes or the person is about to argue for. And they're not 100% wrong in believing that simply because of how many people out there actually do that. And I mean, it starts with the politicians. And I say that because something that everyone's heard, whether it's in the workplace or anything like that, has been the phrase, toe the party line. And obviously that started with political phrasing saying that, all right, you're a part of this party, this is what this party stands for, so that's what you have to stand for. So, especially in dichotomized political countries like Canada or the US or the UK or a lot of Western countries, you have it where people couch their ideas inside of their political team rather than letting their ideas bring them to a particular political team or to a new political ideology. This is probably preaching to the choir for those of you out there that have actually joined the LP and broken away from the generic two-party system. But even then, you've moved to a very specific third-party stance. And there might be some things that you believe or agree with that the LP in general may not be aligned with you on. But chances are, if you wish to see the party succeed, you're going to toe the party line. Now, this spreads to the population, because when people see all ideas couched and grouped inside of these little socio-political tribes, then obviously they're going to pick a side and they're going to regurgitate the same arguments, the same stances, with very little deviation, because they're willing to compromise on things they might have believed on before in order to make sure that they fit inside of the total messaging of this political tribe. Now, taking this a step further, one thing that's very interesting with this type of tribalism is the fact that there's a science behind it. There was a study a number of years ago, I want to say about 20, 25 years ago. There was a study on the center of the brain for recognizing unique individuals. So that is to say, Bob and Doug and Joe and Sally, and knowing all of their life stories and who they are and where they're from, and recognizing them as unique individuals. The brain is only capable of recognizing a limited amount of people before certain traits start to get clumped, before we start to put people into certain generalizations, just to make it easier to keep track of the amount of social interactions that we have and the amount of people who we need to keep track of. Now, in the monkeys they tested, they found that they capped out at about, I want to say about 70 or 80, I believe it was, people total. Whereas in humans, it capped out a little bit closer to the 200 mark. I may be wrong on those numbers. By all means, I suggest that you look up the original study on this, because it was very fascinating work on the way that the brain interacts with other human beings, or with other creatures, I should say, and actually makes a note of who is what. But anyway, back to the main point, the study showed that people have a limited amount of unique individuals that they can actually register. So what we do in order to be able to account for more people overall is we start to generalize different people on their characteristics. We might be able to remember the names and faces of thousands of people, but we're not going to remember enough details about each of them to make them completely unique people in our minds. What we will remember are the key characteristics about them that let us put them into different categories so that we can view them through the lens that we create for those categories. So we might know a bunch of different unique individuals that lean left, but we're going to view all of them through the lens of, all right, they're leftists, or they're Democrats, or they're Republicans, or they belong to X party, X group, X race, X tribe. That's the way our brain is programmed. Once we reach a certain capacity of unique individuals that we can interact with and memorize, our brain will naturally try to subcategorize these people into smaller tribes so that we can account for more people without overtaxing our own brains. So because we do that, it's understandable that we're going to have a particular response that we might use for everyone to that tribe. Or we might be able to assume what everyone in that tribe is going to believe simply because we're viewing them that way. Now, going back to the NPC meme thing, what's interesting is that even though we're doing that, and it's a limitation of our own brains that we do that, a lot of people end up really fulfilling the role and doing it really well, to the point where you have to question if they actually have original thoughts of their own. Another interesting psychological piece of information was a little study that was done on this. I'm trying to remember the exact date here. I want to say it was done 2011. I may be incorrect again. I always recommend anything that I mention in any of these episodes that people go and research themselves so that they can get a better grasp of the source information that I'm working from. That way, because obviously, I can only cover so much inside of the 30 minutes that I decide to do these episodes for, and I usually jump between different topics or different sprinklings of this information. So if and whenever you're looking for more information on these topics, by all means, I suggest going out and researching it. A lot of it can be very fascinating, or at least in my opinion. Otherwise, I wouldn't bother to bring it up on the show and have this conversation about it. But as I was saying, it was done back in 2011. It was on Psychology Today. I remember that part. And it was a little piece about inner monologue. Now, they did a couple of studies, and they found that a lot of people don't actually experience an inner monologue. So outside of the words you hear in your head when you're reading, for example, most of the time people don't conduct an inner monologue. They don't talk to themselves, if you will. Or at least when they do talk to themselves, they usually talk to themselves out loud. They'll either actually speak out loud when they think they're alone, or they'll mutter to themselves a little bit while they're reading or trying to think their way through something, but they're not actually conducting an inner monologue. They're not actually conversing with themselves to work through an idea. They might be sitting there thinking, but there's not actually words formulating in their mind, or they're not actually laying things out in the same way that we might do it on paper, or we might do it when we're actually talking to another person. And part of the NPC meme is the fact that there is no person conducting an inner monologue. The study that I mentioned here said that consistently about maybe 20% of people actually regularly engage in some form of inner monologue. Think about that, about 20% of people. So 1 in 5 people actually conduct a proper inner monologue when they're trying to work through an idea, or they're trying to reach a conclusion on a certain topic that they have in their mind. So rather than, say, actually conversing with themselves to decide whether or not an idea fits in the rest of their worldviews, if they're being ideologically consistent, if what they're about to say or what they're about to do makes perfect sense, they'll just let the brain sort of work on it, and they'll come out with whatever answer that they think is the appropriate answer. But there wasn't any type of direct rationing that can be seen. There's no back and forth monologue like we see with debates that lead to the formulation of greater and greater ideas. People don't have those with themselves generally. So between these two pieces of information, we have it where people don't have an inner monologue most of the time, and people will generalize things into tribes, try to fit into those tribes, and will regurgitate the information from those tribes in order to toe the party line. That sounds exactly like the type of person the NPC meme is describing. And it's fascinating the psychological or social pressure aspects that lead to people acting like this. And it goes beyond just the political world. Primarily the memes being used in the political sense to attack people, primarily on the left for, insert issue here, output bigot, output misogynist, output social outrage, etc., where it's actually just being done like computer programming, where the input is anything that's happening and the output is the stereotypical reply that you would expect. But this extends past just politics. It's not just, the average Trump person's about to yell build the wall whenever they hear the word illegal immigration as an almost automated response. It's not libertarians automatically saying taxes are theft anytime the word tax is brought up, as if that's the cue of if tax, then theft, like a computer program would operate. But it also applies to other aspects of our lives. There was one of them that I saw that had me laughing a little bit, and it showed a series of drawn girls with the expressionless NPC face slapped onto them, and it said, "Oh, you've made a terrible mistake breaking up with me. Who's going to let you touch their butt or want to eat pizza with you now?" And the amount of people that I've seen in years prior to that put out things like, "Oh, I just want someone to touch my butt and eat pizza," or tacos in some cases, or whatever it is. But the exact same general message over and over and over and over and over again, to the point where it's basically the expected response. It's considered what the standard thing to be said is. The fact that it's reached that point just leaves me laughing for the most part, because again, the funniest thing about this meme is the fact that it is so bloody accurate to so many people. Now, not just to turn the whole thing into, here's a bunch of psychological information that validates the usage of this meme to say that people aren't actually acting as people, but the real question is, what can we do about this if we see some of those traits in ourselves? You'd think with the amount of outrage and how quickly this concept went viral, that people would take that as a moment to say, well, no, I do think for myself. So right now this is attacking me because it's saying that I don't think for myself. Well, let's take the opportunity to look at, okay, why do they think that? Oh, they think that because all of these unrelated stances seem to automatically connect themselves. Well, how did I actually get to these results? What was the logical path I took to connect these things? What is this? What is this? How did I get here? Where did I do to make this my ideology? Why am I saying these things? Does this argument go further? Can I say something different? Rather than having that moment of self-reflection in today's day and age, we just flipped it over to immediate moral outcries and an immediate backlash to anyone that might suggest that no, there's nothing wrong with the fact that I came to the same tired expressions, phrases, and concepts that have been regurgitated over and over again. No, I'm not a part of the crowd just because I'm saying everything that the crowd is saying because they're all wearing the same colored shirt as me. No, that couldn't be the case. No. The problem is the people who think that this is a thing. Those are the people that need to be dealt with. Give me a break. Like, honestly, give me a break. One of the worst things that ever happened to public discourse was the concepts of ideological tribalism. We've moved away from tribalism of kin to tribalism of thought. And when we have a form of tribalism of thought, it leads to nothing more than this NPC concept. We're not contributing to the tribe even by actually coming in with something that's unique, something different, something that might change the way this group thinks. We're instead just accepting our programming, going out and regurgitating it based on the proper input stimuli from actual player characters. So I'm going to wrap everything up here and say the little bit that I'm always programmed to say, which is make sure to visit our website at think-liberty.com, hit the little subscribe bell to make sure that you see all of the latest articles as they come out. Follow us on all the social media feeds. I think I mentioned earlier that we're live on Mastodon now. So that's a 6th social media platform that we're on that you can reach us through. Listen to our other podcasts. There's always good stuff there. Check us out on YouTube for a bunch of unique video content that we have on our YouTube channel. And before I wrap everything up fully here, the last thing that I really want to say on this particular NPC meme is, as an exercise, ask yourself how many times you have an automated response for something. And ask yourself if some of your stances are predictable without being related to any other aspect of your ideology. If you can say yes to that last piece, that you can just say things and other people will know what you stand for in other unrelated areas, then you may want to change and stop being a non-player character and start being a rational acting moral agent. If you liked what you heard in the podcast today, or if you have any questions, by all means, you can reach out to us through our social media feeds and send us anything that you want, or any suggestions you have for future episodes of this show or any of the other podcasts. And of course, if you enjoyed what you listened to this week, then I'll see you next one.